Hello there and welcome to the Media Coach video tip. We're sticking with our normal lockdown format, and that is the 3 parts: a book, a speech to have a look at, and something, hopefully a little tip to improve your speaking. So firstly, the book. It's by Monica Wood and it's called The Pocket Muse. And what this is about, they just call it a whole lot of inspiration, is what she calls it on the back. And it's full of imagery, it's full of ideas, it's full of little tips. And what you can do, what I do with it, I simply open it at a random page, have a look at it. In this case, there's a train ticket on there, and I think, what does that make me think of? What story does that remind me of? And I jot down a few notes. So the idea of this is it's to prompt. We were talking about creativity last week. This is to prompt creativity and inspiration, but it's really to remind you of stories, of events, of incidents that maybe you've forgotten. It's a little memory jogger. But it can also make you think about things. There's another exercise in here, for example, where it gives you 10 random letters and you've got to create sentences with the words in the sentence starting with those 10 letters. It's a great exercise, so I recommend that as well. Anyway, that's the book, The Pocket Muse by Monica Wood. The speech. Well, last weekend here we were celebrating or commemorating 75th anniversary of VE Day, Victory in Europe. Close to the end of the Second World War, when there were huge celebrations. There were street parties, which obviously we can't do right now, not very easily. And there was a speech made during wartime, towards the end of the war, by Winston Churchill, which everybody knows sections of. We will fight them on the beaches, etc. Now that speech contains some wonderful examples of rhetoric, particularly anaphora, which is repetition. We shall fight them, we shall fight them, we shall fight them, we shall never surrender. Now, unfortunately, that speech wasn't recorded at the time. There was no audio, there was no video recording in the House of Commons when he delivered it, so it was recorded later on. Some people say it was recorded by a sound-alike actor. I'm not so sure. I think it sounds like Winston himself. Anyway, I'll put a link to that speech. It's a wonderful speech, and it rises to a crescendo. So it uses both anaphora, repetition, and the use of a crescendo followed by a pause to let the message sink in. It's a very short speech, just a few minutes, so take a listen to that and absorb it and see how he builds the tension, adds to it by using a phrase repeatedly, and then delivers the message. It's an absolute masterpiece of rhetoric. And the third thing, a tip to improve your speaking. Telling stories. I talk about telling stories a lot. A lot of people, when they tell stories, they start at the beginning and they end at the end, which appears to make sense, doesn't it? But if you think about this, a lot of stories, a lot of films, a lot of books don't start at the beginning of the story. The timeline starts somewhere in the middle and then goes back to the beginning, and it may even jump about a bit. So think about the most important incident, what we sometimes call the inciting incident in your story. Think about starting your story there and then going back and saying, how did we get here? How did we get here? So think about your stories. Don't tell them in a linear way, but try telling them in a non-linear way. Maybe start with the most important incident. Maybe jump around a little, throw forward, go back, play around with the timeline in your story. And you'll find that if you do that, you can create a much more inspiring, a much more interesting narrative than simply starting at the beginning and ending at the end. So there we are. There are the 3 things for today. The Pocket Muse by Monica Wood, Winston Churchill's "We shall fight them on the beaches" speech, and a tip about making your stories non-linear. I wish you the very best of luck.